Today we're talking about off-road e-bikes. For years, most of my trail riding buddies had the same take on e-bikes. They're heavy, they're weak, and they suck the fun right out of the sport. But I feel that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, this new generation of off-road e-bikes aren't just powerful, they're explosive. So capable, in fact, that most competitions won't even allow them, calling it borderline cheating. So today, I'm breaking down some of the best off-road e-bikes that are slowly overtaking the trails in 2026. Let's dive in. Starting off with the biggest off-road e-bike in the world, we have the Volcon Grunt. I've spent enough time on fat tire bikes to know they're either confidence-inspiring or frustrating, and the Volcon Grunt lands squarely in the middle. On ranch roads, sand, and loose farm trails, those massive tires give you traction that feels almost unfair. You can plow through mud and snow like you're riding a quiet electric ATV. But once you hit technical single track, that same setup works against you. The bike feels bouncy and vague on rocks. The brakes struggle to slow all that weight on steep descents, and the throttle lag makes precise ledge work harder than it should be. It's not built for aggressive trail riding. It's built for utility, hunting access, and mellow off-road exploration. If you're coming from a quad or need a low-maintenance farm bike, for around $6,000, the Grunt makes sense. But if you want something sharp and responsive for real technical terrain, these next few should be a better choice. The Kuberg Ranger is what happens when you cross a dirt bike with a freestyle scooter. And honestly, it's way more fun than it sounds. At just 110 pounds, this thing is absurdly flickable on tight trails and jumps. You can throw it into berms and pop it off lips with almost no effort. And the 14-kilowatt motor delivers that explosive hit people didn't think e-bikes could manage. The stand-up footboard layout gives you aggressive control through rough sections. And you can pop the seat up when you need a break between blasts. But here's the reality. This isn't a long-distance trail bike. The range tops out around 19 miles when you're riding hard, and the scooter-style stance gets tiring on anything beyond short, intense sessions. At mid-range e-dirt bike pricing, it's a brilliant tool for bike parks, jump lines, and quick forest rips. But if you want seated comfort for actual trail exploration, you'll need something else. One of the biggest complaints I used to hear about e-bikes was that you couldn't ride them legally anywhere except private land. The NIU XQi3 fixes that problem. It's street legal, which means you can actually commute on it and then hit trails without loading it into a truck. At 156 pounds, it's light enough to feel playful on moderate off-road terrain, and the removable battery means you can swap in a fresh pack if you're planning a longer session. The power delivery is smooth and approachable, with multiple modes that let you dial it down for city riding or crank it up for trail work. But here's where it shows its limits. Push it hard on aggressive trails and the suspension starts to feel overwhelmed. And the range drops fast if you're riding in boost mode. At around $6,500, it's positioned as a versatile street and trail hybrid, not a hardcore enduro machine. If you want one bike that does both without compromise, this is a smart option. Just don't expect it to handle big jumps or high-speed whoops like a dedicated dirt bike. The thing about longer trail sessions is that most e-bikes either run out of battery or feel like they're fighting you after an hour. The RFN ARES Rally PRO doesn't do that. With a 3.2 kilowatt-hour battery, you can actually ride for 50 to 100 kilometers depending on how aggressive you get, which puts it closer to a full day on the trails rather than a quick session. The geometry feels like a proper dirt bike. 19-inch front, 18-inch rear, real suspension travel. So it handles technical climbs and loose descents naturally. The multi-mode setup is smart. You can crawl through rocky sections in turtle mode, then switch to rocket for punchy climbs that lift the front wheel effortlessly. But the suspension isn't quite premium level. Push it hard on rough trails, and you'll notice it's not as plush as high-end race bikes. At around 220 pounds ready to ride, it's also heavier than play bikes like the Kuberg. Still, for riders who want serious trail capability and range without the cost of a Stark or Flux, this delivers. If you spent time on tight, technical single track, you know that weight and agility matter more than raw horsepower. The Surron Ultra Bee gets this balance right. At 190 pounds, it's light enough to flick through switchbacks and pop over obstacles without fighting the bike. But the 4 kilowatt-hour battery gives you legitimate trail range, 25 to 60 miles depending on how hard you push it. The power modes let you dial in exactly what you need: Eco for range, Daily for controlled trail riding, and Sport when you want that explosive hit on climbs. The newer HP version bumps power into the 21 kilowatt range without raising the price, which sits around $6,500. But here's the trade-off: the suspension has about 10 inches of travel, which is fine for most trail work, but starts to feel overwhelmed on big hits or fast whoops. The 19-inch wheels and narrow stock tires can also feel nervous in deep sand or loose terrain. For tight, twisty trails where nimbleness matters, this thing is incredibly capable. Just don't expect it to handle like a full-size MX bike. There's a point on steep, loose climbs where most e-bikes either spin out or bog down. The Bonnell 805 doesn't have that problem. With up to 56 horsepower and a full-size 21/18 wheel setup, this thing climbs like it's cheating. The power-to-weight ratio at 211 pounds feels closer to a race bike than a trail bike, and the 245 millimeters of travel front and rear handles rough terrain with real confidence. What makes it usable is the 5 tunable ride modes and traction control. You can dial it down for technical single track or crank it up for MX style riding. The swappable battery setup, up to 4.7 kilowatt hours, means you can carry a spare pack for longer sessions. But here's the catch: this much power demands respect. Newer riders will find it overwhelming, and even experienced riders need to set up the maps carefully. It's also positioned in the upper mid-range price bracket, below bikes like the Stark Varg, but well above casual play bikes. If you want serious race-capable performance without top-shelf pricing, this delivers. One thing that always felt missing on single-speed e-bikes was the ability to shift down for a gnarly climb, or shift up to cruise without maxing out the motor. The AMP Moto RR fixes that with a 4-speed manual gearbox, and it changes everything. You can drop into first for technical climbs with massive torque, then shift up for faster sections without overworking the system. With 33.5 horsepower and a 4.3 kilowatt-hour battery, it delivers 450 class performance and claims up to 95 miles of range if you ride smart with the gears. At 275 pounds, it's heavier than mid-weight bikes, but the suspension handles rough trails confidently, and the manual transmission makes it feel more engaging than most electrics. The catch? It's a new platform. Long-term reliability and dealer support are still unproven, and the gearbox adds complexity that some riders won't want. Early pricing around $3,250 makes it an insane value on paper, but you're betting on a newer brand. If you want 450 power with gears and don't mind being an early adopter, this is compelling. Before we get to my final 2 absolute favorite off-road e-bikes on this list, if you're into no BS breakdowns like this, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Not ready for that? Totally fine. Just drop a like instead, because that's what helps me know this kind of content is actually useful. When people said e-bikes couldn't match 450s, they clearly hadn't ridden anything like the Flux Primo. This thing puts out 85 horsepower and 750 newton meters at the rear wheel, numbers that straight up embarrass most gas bikes. The KYB forks and Öhlins rear shock handle aggressive riding with the kind of confidence you'd expect from a premium race bike. And the virtual clutch system lets you modulate power for technical sections without losing the instant torque advantage. The 6.7 kilowatt-hour battery and advanced cooling keep performance consistent even during long, hard sessions, which is where a lot of earlier e-bikes would start to fade. But here's the reality. 85 horsepower on dirt is more than most riders can actually use without just spinning the rear tire and burning range. It's also still early stage. Production numbers, long-term reliability, and dealer support are all question marks. This is positioned in the premium bracket alongside the Stark Varg, aimed squarely at serious racers and expert riders who want bleeding-edge performance and don't mind being early adopters. And finally, we have the Stark Varg. This baby is the sole reason competition started banning e-bikes in the first place. It's been the most powerful off-road e-bike for years now, with up to 80 horsepower on tap, and torque numbers that makes 450cc gas bikes feel slow. Not only that, you can dial it anywhere from 10 to 80 horsepower depending on conditions or skill level from its integrated app. The KYB suspension with over 300 millimeters of travel handles rough trails and big hits with race-grade confidence, and the 260-pound weight feels perfectly balanced through technical sections. What makes it genuinely unfair is the adjustability. You can soften the power for slick climbs, crank it up for wide open sections, and fine-tune engine braking and regen to match the terrain. At around $13,000 for the street-legal EX version, it's positioned as the benchmark for electric MX and enduro bikes. The limitation is range. Ride it hard and you'll get about an hour to an hour and a half before needing a charge. This isn't a casual trail bike, it's a race tool that happens to be electric. If you want the absolute best performance and don't mind the premium price, this is still the standard everything else gets measured against.